April 22nd on a Monday. It's about 2:45 in the afternoon. This morning I arrived at a client's office about 7 a.m. to return a computer to the receptionist. Her name is Rose. I had her computer over the weekend, did an upgrade from Windows 7 to Windows 10, an upgrade to an SSD hard drive, kept the SATA drive in the computer as a second drive to receive backups using Macrium Reflect paid version backups, so that the paid version allows me to have email notices sent to myself and to Rose for successful backups, backups with warnings, and backups with errors or just failed backups. I had the computer completely set up and ready before she arrived at 8. While waiting for her, I helped her boss, Dawn. Last weekend, I had upgraded his computer from Windows 7 to Windows 10 and an SSD hard drive. Actually, his situation was different because his computer actually died. The motherboard went bad. And so I bought him a new computer with an SSD hard drive and a SATA drive to receive the backups. So a similar setup, more work on his computer than hers because it was a fresh install, so I had to install his software. But for now, we're going to stick with her computer. I also removed some software that was not needed anymore and checked the computer over for proper operations, replaced a case fan that was not running properly. Anyway, while waiting for Rose, I went to help Don to see how he was getting along with the new computer. And he said, Windows 10 takes a lot more clicks to do anything. And I said, well, there's probably easier ways to do the things that you want to do. I need for you to show me a sample of what takes more clicks. To do so, he opened Microsoft Outlook into his email, and he uses folders in Outlook to manage his email. Good on him for doing that. But what he demonstrated was he clicked on one email, then right-click, then choose Move. Then the folders that he could select from to move that email to didn't have the one that he wanted, so he had to go click on More and then scroll down to find the parent of the folder that he wanted, then expand that folder, then click on the folder, then click OK. So he had several clicks that he was using to move one email. So I showed him how he could go to his inbox, click on one email, and then control-click on any other emails that need to go to the same folder, and then just drag that over to the left-hand column where all your folders are. He'd have to drag his mouse down to the bottom, and it would automatically scroll down his list of folders. When he found the parent folder of the folder that he wanted, just float your mouse over the plus sign, and that folder will expand. Then put your mouse over the folder that you want to move those emails to and let go of the mouse button. That moves them all to that folder with the one click. Granted, there's some mouse dragging to accomplish it. He liked that. He said, well, that's easier than it was in Windows 7. And said, well, you could have been doing that in Windows 7. It works just as well there. But he had never asked me about this issue, so we had never talked about it. So I told him that there may be other things that you're finding that there's a lot of clicks that you have to do. I can probably show you quicker, easier ways to do it. You just got to talk to me about them. And I have remote access to his computer, so he said he would call me when he comes across something else. He didn't have something on his mind right then. He needed to turn his mind towards business. Well, there was one other issue that I needed to help him with. He has a Epson laser printer, and he said with Windows 7 it would print the last page first, and then pages would stack on top of each other in the order that he needs them. And now it's printing the first page first, so he has to reshuffle the papers every time he prints. So I said, okay, give me a minute to look it over. And he went on about things that he needed to do. And what I found was the printer driver that Windows 10 had installed did not have the option for printing in reverse order. So I tried to update the driver and use the Windows Update button within that menu path. And his printer was not listed as one of the printer choices that became available then. There were some printer models that were kind of close, but really pretty far off. So then I went to the Epson website, searched for his printer model there, and downloaded the driver for it, installed it, and then the option for printing in reverse order was there. I made that selection in the Windows 10 control panel, devices and printers. Right-click on the printer icon in there and choose preferences and make the choice for printing in reverse order there. And by doing it there instead of in a application program, that means it would become his default for any program that he prints from. So he was happy with that. And then when Rose arrived, I went over to her computer to see how she was feeling about it, because she had had a minute or two to poke around with it. And I think the first thing she asked me was, how did you get Windows 10 to look just like Windows 7? Well, first of all, I was pleased that that's what she thought. And I told her, well, I'm not sure what you're referring to, but a couple things I did do is I turned off the Cortana display. I have yet to find a Windows 10 person that uses Cortana. Also turned off the task view button and turned off the show people button and removed the shopping bag icon and let's say the Windows mail icon. Set up her icons on her taskbar the way that I thought that she would be accustomed to. And then she said, but it wasn't any of those things, that her Windows 10 computer at home has all of these rectangles on the screen. And I said, oh, you mean the Windows Metro interface? She said, well, I guess so. I didn't know that's what it's called. And I said, well, I think you have Windows 8 at home, not Windows 10. And she said, yeah, you're right. And she had forgotten that completely. She was quite unhappy, or somewhat unhappy, about having to upgrade to Windows 10. Of course, Windows 7 is not going to be supported after January of 2020. So I'm currently, one by one, upgrading clients to Windows 10. She wasn't happy about that. And it turns out it's because she thought she was going to have those tiles on her screen. So I said, no, that's Windows 10, not Windows 8. And I think we can upgrade your Windows 8 computer to Windows 10 as well. And she said, oh, okay, well, I don't need to do that just yet. And we looked up the end of life for Windows 8, and it was something like 2023. So she's got a while before she needs to do that. She thought that she'd probably be replacing that computer before then anyway. Then, let's see, she had some other issues she wanted to deal with. Let's see, we discussed the change of how the backups were going to operate. She no longer has to check backups every day because we're going to be getting the emails. She no longer has to check to make sure the backup software is in the system tray, because the software we were using previously was running as an application in the system tray. And sometimes you restart the computer and it wouldn't load. And trying to remember the other things that she had at hand. Oh, some icons on her desktop that weren't needed, so we discussed those and removed the programs, uninstalled programs from the past. A couple of printer softwares from the past that aren't needed anymore. One application on her desktop that I thought could have been a residual from some virus or hacker type attempt. And I asked her about the icons on her desktop because she has a lot of PDF files stored on her desktop. She has a folder on her desktop that contains all of her Microsoft Word documents and Excel documents, and she's not using her My Documents folder at all. Everything is stored on the desktop. And I told her, well, back when Windows 95 first came around, we learned, and we advised people to not store actual documents on the desktop because it consumes resources and will slow the computer down. That doesn't seem to be such a problem anymore. And she's so accustomed to storing them on the desktop that I said, I'm not going to really push you into that. And she's kind of comfortable with the way they are on the desktop. But we're going to be implementing Microsoft OneDrive to do off-site backups of data files. So I needed to find out from her if she was wanting to stick with that. The backups that are happening to the SATA hard drive on her computer, that protects her against her SSD hard drive going bad, but it does not protect her against somebody breaking into the office and stealing the computer, or perhaps fire in the building and damaging the computer. So I really wanted to get them, both her and her boss, configured for Microsoft OneDrive to back up their data files in the cloud. And when I first mentioned to both of them, they kind of took a second glance at that and they said, I thought you didn't like the cloud. Well, that was true a few years ago. It was kind of new and a different environment. There were charges, there were configuration issues, so I wasn't a big fan of it right away, but now I've warmed up to it quite a bit. I use it a lot myself. And I like that we can get multiple historical versions of files from the cloud. And of course, I like that if a computer gets stolen, we still have the data files accessible. So I told her that I had tried to set up OneDrive for her, but when I put in her email address, I got a message from Microsoft saying that that email address was already associated with a Microsoft account. And so I tried logging into it. And when I tried to log into the account, it told me they don't have an account with that name. Yet when I tried to activate OneDrive, it was telling me that it already had that email address. So that was kind of a head scratcher. So I stepped through it with her. When I got to the screen that was indicating that it already existed, I read it a little more closely. And what I realized was it said that email address was already associated with a Microsoft account. It didn't say that Microsoft account already existed. I'm not sure that I quite realized the connection then, but I went ahead and clicked past that to try to create the account anyway, and it sent an email to her email address, gave us a 4-digit code. We put in the code, and then I got a message saying this email address is already associated with the following account, and it gave us in the account name that it was already associated with. It gave us 2 letters, an asterisk, at outlook.com. So it's a different email address. And I said, those first 2 letters, does that make any sense to you? And she said no. After a few moments thinking about it, I thought, wasn't there a person that used to work here by the name of Heather? Because the first 2 letters was H-E or H something. And I made the connection to Heather. And she said, yeah, there was. So I checked in my notes and searched for @outlook.com. And I did find an @outlook.com email address in my notes for their office, but it wasn't Heather. It was a different name, different initials entirely. And I figured, well, that probably still explains it. So I clicked forward past that message, and it went ahead and created the account. Gave us another place asking for a 4-digit code. And then put in a password for that account, different than her other passwords. It's important not to use the same password for different accounts. And I made a record of that password. And you know what? I don't recall if she wrote that down. I'll need to get back to her on that. She's really good about keeping track of her passwords. Good on her. So now the account is created, and I considered for a moment. I said, you know what? I think I'm going to set up your backups to this cloud drive after hours, because when it first starts doing that synchronization, it might slow your computer down because it's going to be busy synchronizing all your files. So I'll do that after hours. And then she asked to look in her scans folder. There's an icon on her desktop to access her scans folder, which is off of the C drive, C:\scans. There's a bunch of files in there. Now, I already knew that that folder on her desktop that housed all of her Word and Excel documents was pretty close to the limit for a free Microsoft OneDrive account. Now, they're not going to have any problem with paying for the larger access, but I just made a mental note that we might have to go bigger. I asked her, should these scanned files be backed up? And she thought about it a moment and said, yeah, they probably should be. Didn't sound like it's a big crisis if they get missed, but it would just be an inconvenience if they lost them. So we're probably going to be using the first level of paid account with OneDrive for her. Now, on my way, after I left their office, I went to grab some breakfast. Then, driving back to my home office, I got a phone call from another client. It's an attorney's office. Raquel, a paralegal in the office, was at the front desk where the receptionist sits. They have a new receptionist there. And she told me that the F drive is missing. And so I asked her to open Windows Explorer. That's down at the bottom of your screen on the taskbar. It's the icon that looks like a yellow manila folder. Just click on that to open Windows Explorer. Now, I went into this explanation about where the icon is. I didn't know if she already knew that or not. And that's kind of my habit, is when I ask a person to do something on the computer, I will use the technical term and then define it without waiting for them to ask for that. I don't want them to ask for it because oftentimes they just kind of feel stupid that they ought to know that. They shouldn't always already know about that because their job is their job. This is a law office, so she works with legal forms and issues, and that's enough for them to have to handle. I do not expect them to understand technical terms, so I will voluntarily give that explanation of what I mean. So anyway, she opened the Windows Explorer and I said, now look down the left-hand side. You might have to scroll down to see if you can find the F drive. It might have a red X through it. And she said, no, it's not there, but the T drive is. And next to the T drive, it says time slips. That's where we keep their time slips data. Well, it's the same server as the F drive. So I know that now that she's got access to the server, the network cable is fine. Internet connection is most likely fine. So that gave me a whole lot of information about what is working. Then I asked her, did you try restarting the computer? Yes, we did. We did that before we called you. Good on her. My clients have experienced enough occasions where one of the first solutions is restart the computer and it fixes the problem. And they often will feel silly when I ask them to restart the computer and that fixes the problem. And they think, oh, I could have done that. I said, and I tell them in those instances that, yeah, a lot of things can be fixed by restarting the computer. And if you care to, you could just do that before calling me. And so then I ask her to close all the programs you have open right now and look on the desktop to see if there's an icon there called Fix Network Drives. I frequently put an icon on the desktop called Fix Network Drives. It's a shortcut to a batch file that uses the netuse command to remap whatever network drive letters that we use in that office. And I typically do that on a computer that has encountered instances where it loses its drive mappings. So she was looking for that, and I was just about to offer my explanation of how to find that on the desktop when she says, yeah, it's here. The explanation I was about to give, and this is because some people have so many icons on their desktop, and particularly if the person I'm talking to on the phone isn't the usual user at that computer, I was going to tell her, click on any icon on the desktop, press the letter F for fixed network drives, press the letter F, and the highlighter should move to the next icon that begins with the letter F. If that's not fixed network drives, then press the F again. It'll move to the next one. Press F again, and again, and again. If you see that it's just rotating between the same icons on the desktop, then that would mean fixed network drives is not there. If you do find it, then just press the Enter key or double click on it, and that'll launch it. So she had already found it without me giving her that tip. She double-clicked on fixed network icons. A black window appears just briefly and then goes away. And I said, now go back into Windows Explorer, see if the F drive is there. She says, yes, it is. Click on it, see if the files show up. Yes, they do. And she says, oh, that was easy. So that was the end of the call. Well, I was driving at the time, and I kind of deliberated in my mind whether I would intend to enter a time slip for that when I get to my computer. I typically will. In that occasion, I kind of thought that I was just going to overlook it, but I like putting in time slips for these little short phone calls. Some people might think that it's nickel and diming the client to death, but it's not that at all. It has actually a very opposite effect. Nickel and diming a client to death would be a valid thing to say if I have a policy of, like I've known of some other consultants' offices to have a minimum 15-minute charge. And then they'll have a minimum invoice of 1 hour. So if they bill monthly, if you had a 2-minute phone call, they'll bill a minimum of 15 minutes for that call. And if you have no other service during the month, then that's going to generate a full hour for that invoice for the end of the month. Now that is nickel and diming a client to death. That's not what I'm suggesting. What I do is I put in a start time and an end time. I would pick off that information from my call log on my phone, just punch the button for recent calls, and I'd enter the beginning time and the ending time on the computer. It figures out how much time that is and divides it from my hourly rate. So my client might get an invoice line item that is for a few minutes, just a few dollars. But the key thing is the text. It'll give the start time and the end time, and it'll say phone support, fixed access to the F drive. That is a big deal, because what it's showing is with this small dollar amount, I fixed something over the phone, very quick phone call, and got the person back to work so they don't have as much downtime. So my clients are accustomed to seeing these little tiny charges on their invoices. Now I believe, and I haven't had the conversation with them, but I believe that they look at that invoice and they see these little tiny charges with this explanation that says, I fixed something that could have had a person out of or unproductive for a longer period of time for this very small dollar amount, and I think that gives them a good feeling. They know I could stick that for a much larger time. I know that there are computer support companies that when you call them with a problem, you'll get a front office person that'll schedule a technician to come out for an on-site service call no matter what it is. Or if they do handle it by phone, it'll be a call back. We'll call you back within the next couple of hours. So now you got downtime again. So I like my clients seeing those little charges, because if they weren't there, then all they would see is these charges that were multiple hours per hit, and they would then look at it and say, every time we call Doug, it generates $300, $400, $500 in charges. So then they tell their staff, don't call Doug. Avoid calling Doug. Try everything you can to fix it before calling Doug. And what that does is that increases the level of frustration in the office over the subject of computer support. It increases the level of frustration for the client. It increases my stress, because when they do finally call me, they're kind of stressed out. And it's just not a good thing by any measure. Now, if a consultant is on some kind of a contract basis and they don't charge individually for these things, then what I'm aware of that can happen is the consultant can sound a little bit annoyed at getting the call and questioning, well, did you do this? You should have done this. You should have tried this before calling me. And that puts stress on the client, puts a stressful conversation. And I find that by charging for my actual time, start time and end time, we just don't have that kind of thing happening. Well, you know what? I think that's good enough for this session. I'll catch you another time. Goodbye.